Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pros and Cons. This is a podcast by emerging writers for emerging writers because sometimes we feel like prose, absolute powerful prose, and sometimes we feel like cons, a little bit crooked, sitting in the shady corner of the bar, cons. Today I'm joined by Ali Burnham.
Hello, good to be back.
Oh, do you want to give your little thing of
Who I am?
Yeah,
that's right, because no one knows who we are.
Also, Ellie, who are you really quick? You just kind of popped up
Why
today.
are you here? I'm a screenwriter primarily, but I've been dabbling in prose for the past couple of years. I've won a few awards, that's nice. Few films in film festivals. And by day I work in a literary development organization.
Right. Matan, who are you?
I just gotta say, literary development is the coolest way I've heard someone call that.
It's good because no one knows what it means until you stop and think about it.
If you put it in an acronym like a LTD or something, that would be no.
Well, that sounds a little less like something you want to get. Yeah.
Yeah.
No one wants LTD. My name is Matan. I am a writer. Publish a few short stories, quite a few of them with Precipice Fiction. I write horror and fantasy, and by day I teach high schoolers the difference between conditional 1 and 2. Yeah, we'll do a bonus chapter of me just rambling about the beauty of grammar.
I'd be down for a grammar episode. Anyway, I'm Phoenix Rigg. I'm the founder of Bent Light Writing, which what is Bent Light Writing? We're a freelance editing house. We do your typical editing services, but what we are primarily focusing on is authenticity readings and gathering readers from around the world and improving story authenticity. And I'm also a children's author. Yeah, that's about it. That's me. And today on Pros and Cons, we're going to be talking about fan fiction, which is something that I know Allie's got a lot to say. I know I've got a lot to say. Matan, I'm curious to see what
I've got
you
like
got to
an
say.
average. I've got the usual amount to say,
Yeah.
not more than usual, not less than usual. I feel like you guys have
a normal
more
amount
than
of
usual
things to say about fan fiction.
This was one where I had trouble fitting my thoughts on a page because I'm just like, oh my gosh, fan fiction, like so much to say. So we're going to be talking about
holy fuck.
I sat down 30 minutes ago and I'm like, I'm going to quickly put my just quick thoughts on paper, and that's what I did.
Yeah.
Our reaction is to Ali showing
version of this. I just held up 2 full pages of Van's squiggle notes.
Yeah. I have mine in a digital form, which isn't as fun to hold up, but I have to actively scroll to get through. It's whatever. It's like the same thing. Anyway, it's notes, whatever. Anyway, yes, we're talking about fan fiction, and for those of you that don't know, fan fiction is when you have a source work of media of some kind, show, book, whatever, and then you have fan fiction, which is a fan, or maybe not even a fan, but someone who has taken the source work, use it as inspiration to write their own work based off of that original work.
Like the Star Wars sequels, or is that not?
Well,
is it too soon in the podcast to make that comment? Okay.
No. So I wanted to start by asking you both, what are your relationships to fan fiction? Do you read it? Do you like it? What has fan fiction been like in your sphere? Matan, would you like to go? I thought I'd let you go before I should,
because I'm going to be shorter. Okay.
I appreciate it.
No worries. I actually used to read a lot of fan fiction, mostly in times in life where I didn't have a lot of time, or I wasn't living at home, and therefore did not have access to a lot of books. Fan fiction is free, has to be free. and is usually found in the internet, quite accessible for your phone. And I think 99% of fan fiction that I've read on my mobile phone, usually like waiting in line somewhere or just like being busy, that kind of stuff. For the most part, I loved it. For a time, there was a time where I would just like read non-stop fan fiction.
Wow.
Most of it would be of a source material that does not come as a book. Most of the fan fiction I read came like I wouldn't read Harry Potter and then read a Harry Potter fan fiction necessarily, but I would play a video game or watch even an anime or watch a TV show and would like to feel the urge to see it in a novel format, like to read it as well as watch it. Also, it scratched the itch of extra content, which is so nice. And some other reasons to read fan fiction, which is I think we're going to discuss in detail that sometimes it goes in a direction that is different from the source material, even vastly different, which is also an itch that we sometimes want to scratch. But yeah, that's my introduction to that.
Right on.
I love that. I didn't know that about you, that you had read that much. That's very cool.
It was
Yeah.
a 2-3 years of intense fan fictionism, if that's a thing.
I'm glad you're here to I'm glad you have actually read a lot of fan fiction. I have a lot to say about fan fiction, but I've not read a lot of fan fiction. So I feel a bit like I have weird poser mentality in that regard. But I actually but I don't feel bad about it because the thing I actually don't attack fan fiction itself much. So I'll get into that later.
You don't know where the conversation will go.
This is true. That's true.
Yeah, I too would like to arrive on a nuanced take on fan fiction. I guess if someone asks my initial opinion of it, I pull a poo face. But I do like to wind that back, and I'll be like,
Yeah.
well, no, let's talk it through. Let's talk it through. So I'll admit I don't have a lot of experience reading fan fiction, but I can talk to writing a little bit of it. I would say we're talking ages 10, 11, 12.
wow.
Before my house still had like dial-up internet, and I didn't even have my own computer or anything. We're talking that age. I must have been 10, 11. So I didn't even know what fan fiction was. I didn't even know it was a term for a thing people did. It was just Ali the child gravitated and found this very natural thing to do on her own as a child who was learning to write and discovering that she liked writing. So I think there were notebooks that existed at some point that were Harry Potter fan fiction and the Maximum Ride books. That may have missed both of you guys because they're Australian YA books. But the Maximum Ride books, I'd also wrote fan fiction for those two. I think those were probably the only two. But I just remember the drive being wanting to play in these worlds that I loved. That it was pre-established worlds with pre-established rules and characters. So the muscles a writer gets to exercise are plot, dialogue, pacing, and even just prose. So all those tools are new when you can play without having to worry about world building tools and character tools, really. So for me, I can look back and see it as a really cool like gateway drug to creative writing, and as a fandom exploit, getting to generate more content in the fandom you love and want to play with. But I think pretty soon, I didn't do it for very long. I feel like maybe 2 years later, I was already then world building my own worlds and creating my own plots and characters. And I never really looked back. And it was not until I was late teens that I realized, hang on, fan fiction is a thing that people do religiously. And that kind of baffled me as a concept. That not everyone did what I did and just used it as a gateway to your own writing. It was something people actually did as their own. No, this is the thing. This is my hobby. This is what I care about. So that I'm like, oh, that's an alien thing to me. So I've learned to appreciate it and also be frustrated by it from the outside, I guess, is my take on fan fiction.
I feel like I have a pretty similar relationship to it in the sense like I have not read much fan fiction at all. Actually, the only fan fiction I can recall reading was my brother and I read. Have either of you heard of the show Seventh Heaven?
No.
Yeah, I've heard of the show.
Okay, yeah, it's an old like Christian family warm-hearted TV show back in the States, whatever. And my brother, as a joke, just like my brother and I way later just read some Seventh Heaven fan fiction because we found a page dedicated to it, and we just found that just psychologically fascinating.
But
Yeah.
I have to know how the fan fiction is different. Like you just said, a Christian family. Where does the fan fiction go with this?
Oh, well, this is the thing, is it's like the least fan fictionable sort of material you would think, because it's just like this family, it's like an episodic, warm-hearted sort of family thing. So
Aw.
there's no like grand plot or anything like that I can remember. So it's just them taking these characters, these wholesome characters, and they just wanted to write their own scenarios with them, so they did. The Christian elements I don't even recall in the fan fiction, but that's the only bit I can actually recall reading. Any other relationship I have with fan fiction is just as an observer of it from the outside, and I have a similar relationship to it where reading it makes me a lot of the time makes me feel a little bit itchy, because it's like a lot of the time it's not very good, but that's not because it's fan fiction, that's because it's not particularly well written. And but also the thing that I also just admire it in a way that also frustrates me in a way as well, because it's written by pure hobbyists, pure people that are just like, they just want to continue these worlds, and they do it because they want to, and they love it, and that's why they do it. There's no like intent to submit to commercial publishers or anything like that. They want to explore these worlds more, and they do it. And for that, I'm like, hats off to you for just writing for your own enjoyment. And I don't know, I think that's so cool. And sometimes that makes me feel like, I don't know, it's just like, look at me just, grinding to see what I can make of myself and stuff. Whereas this person's just over there humbly just writing. It's like they're the monk in the corner just writing.
Aww.
And they're having a great time.
And they're having a great time.
I
But
totally
I-
get that. The same itchy feeling you're describing. And then, but you see, but they had a Hufflepuff and I'm a Slytherin, and what am I judging them for? I try to have that sense of introspection a little bit. I had two examples before we moved on. I wanted to mention. So I remember as a teen, everyone was laughing about this one bit of fan fiction called My Immortal. Have either of you heard of it?
It weirds the faintest, most like subconscious bell.
It was very famous for being a terrible, terrible Harry Potter fan fiction online. It was like eons long. So hats off to whoever teenager sunk hours and hours of their life into this self-insert fan fiction where they got to go to Hogwarts, but they were also a vampire. And just
nice.
every male character was their love interest. And there was just lots and lots of detail about all the really cool goth clothes she wore every day.
Nice.
So it's just this perfect time capsule of a certain era, of a certain teenage girl mentality. So I can look back on it and be like, what a charming thing that existed at that time. But it got onto my radar to look it up, because you would look it up and you would laugh at it. And I imagine you can still look at it and just be like, what is this glimpse into this mind? That is fascinating. As a pure contrast, then, on the other end of the scale, a fan fiction, I can't say I've actually read it, but I've heard about it in great detail. I've had it described to me, is the Fallout Equestria fan fiction. And essentially what this is what I imagine is a very large project, I think, pulled together by a couple of people, but so Equestria, so we're talking My Little Pony, but
Okay,
it is...
Yeah.
Yeah, if that wasn't obvious, we're talking My Little Pony.
It wasn't, but now
But it's essentially this quite adult take, and I say adult in the sense that it's quite sophisticated intoxicated with the themes of war it wants to talk about. It is all the
Did you hear
characters.
war?
Yeah, the fallout of war. Like all the
But
worlds
with
in the
but
My Little Pony
ponies.
world have gone to war. All the main characters we love are now hardened
Hold on, what?
generals.
The ponies,
Yeah.
Ali? The ponies are going to war?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
they don't
they're
have thumbs. They don't have thumbs. How can they go to
no,
war?
but they're unicorns. They have magic. A lot of them are quite
Are they
strong. They have
stabbing each
powers, so they
other?
can actually harm each other. And so there's a lot
Oh
of emotional
God.
baggage, as you imagine there is when one goes to war. So it's just a complicated political situation with adult characters that just also happen to be horses dealing with this. So that's Fallout Equestria, and I've heard
I
a lot
love
of great
that.
things about Fallout Equestria. So it kind of shows that, you know, there are people who will put quite high quality and development into this. So it's not just me writing off fan fiction as poor writing. It's I tried to work out what it is that gives me the itchies. We're going to stick on that metaphor when I discuss it. And I think it is this idea that people will sink hours and hours and hours into fan fiction, just as we sink hours and hours into our own writing. And it can be equally demanding, exhausting, all-consuming. So a part of me just wonders, like, why would you spend so much time on stuff that wasn't your own IP? And that's like the logic thing I can't cross. And I almost feel like we now need to go and seek out a fan fiction writer to really get into like the psychology of it. And I think we are honing on this idea that they love the fandom, they love contributing to the fandom building, fandom conversation. It's just an excellent hobby, and I can appreciate all that. But just as we're all working writers, and I think, not to speak for both of you, but I think you might share a similar, but you're putting that much energy into developing your craft. It almost feels like wasted potential that these writers, fully fledged writers, could be creating incredible, unique projects of their own with their own unique voice. And I'm like, it almost feels like wasted potential when it is sunk into existing IP.
But I really agree with you too about sometimes it's almost even the tragedy of fan fiction that you read a really good one and you're like, oh, if you only, like change the names, the power system and all that, you could have been like a writer. But something I want to bring up is there actually are pathways to novelization through fan fiction. And actually, I was obsessed with the Dragon Age games. I love them to death. BioWare in general, all BioWare is in my blood. But I used to read fan fiction about Dragon Age. And just because I didn't want the stories to stop. And then I discovered there are actually novels about Dragon Age, not all necessarily written by the writers of the games. And these novels got the official BioWare stamp as canon novels happening
Oh, wow.
and the same happened, by the way, in Warhammer, in
Yeah.
Star Wars. Fan fiction gets, I don't want to say laundered, but it is like it does get officialized. Is that a word? But fan fiction in some universes does have a pathway towards being considered actually canon. The Star Wars one got out of control before Disney bought it and kind of streamlined it for better or for worse. But if I think that if you're serious about writing fan fiction with the goal of being included in a shared universe where your writing can become I don't want to say real, but accepted. I don't know what's the word here. I think that's nice, but if you're just pouring hours and hours into writing your version of Twilight, I mean, that did happen and became into 50 Shades of Grey. But anyway, if I'm saying that it does feel a bit like, a Sisyphean task that I don't want to say wasting, but it's a bit of a shame, especially if you're talented. And Ali, I liked what you said early that you're kind of working on one side of your writer's brain, which is characters, dialogue, conflict, but you're neglecting other elements that are important, like creating the characters from scratch, creating the settings, which I think if you only do fan fiction for a while, can kind of leave part of your writer skills underdeveloped.
So I'm actually gonna move the conversation a little bit because what I would like to argue, so what you said, Matan, like you said, 50 Shades of Grey started as a fan fiction
I
of
believe so, yeah.
Twilight. Yeah, it did. So that's 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. That was inspired by Twilight. You also have City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, which was inspired by Harry Potter. And The Love
Right, I didn't know that.
Hypothesis. Yeah.
But that checks out. My God. Okay.
The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood or Ali Hazelwood, and that was inspired by Star Wars. These are all very famous novels that were basically fan fiction to start out. So I would actually like to say that the problem itself is not fan fiction. The problem is, once again, not so great writing. And the problem that actually happens is that fan fiction has its own pitfalls that are very tempting, that a lot of writers, especially new writers, fall into, because a lot of people that write fan fiction are inspired by a work that already exists. They had a great time at the cinema. They had a great time reading this book. The plot thrilled them. The characters, they felt relationships with the characters. So you get a lot of like what Ali said, self-insertion, where they just essentially want to exist in this world. So they're putting themselves in this world, and it's not actually about like thematic development or plot development. It's more about just like having fun imagining themselves in this world. But there are a lot of other pitfalls with fan fiction that are not actually fan fiction unique. You see a lot of the pitfalls of fan fiction actually popping up a lot with full-fledged, like full production pieces these days. Actually, it's actually a fairly widespread problem, I would say, a lot now with heavy sequelization. And Matan, you mentioned the new Star Wars movies before. You can, if you want to, do you have anything you'd like to say about Star Wars?
I think it's not just the new Star Wars, but the IP, the idea of an IP naturally coming to its end and then 25, 30 years later being revived, sometimes using the same actors, sometimes using new actors. I mean, just because you legally have the rights to continue writing something, you're not the same writer, which is fine. It's not against the law, but you often feel it that this is not the same heart and brain that conjured the original, and maybe it is worthy of what came before. Maybe the fans endorse it, but a lot of times just feel like, yeah, someone got permission to write fanfic. That's it, and produce it.
Yeah.
That's how I
no.
see it.
I
think
yell
you've
it at
hit
the
on
TV
something.
so much. Like you are just paid fan fiction writers sometimes.
Yeah,
Which
no.
some people, that's their dream. They would love to write the next Hogwarts story, you know? Good for them, you know? Power to them.
But yeah, I guess the trick is doing something interesting with it. Because what you said before, Phoenix, I think is absolutely true. It'd be silly to pretend that professional writers aren't inspired by other works of art. I think I think the reason we start a lot of our podcasts is talking about things we're consuming at the moment, because we're like, oh, this is inspiring me. This is really getting my creative juices flowing. I love this. And for me, that talking about that step of going from fan fiction to writing my own stuff, for a while it was just taking, say, a scenario, which I later worked out was called a trope, and just put my own clothes on it. And so that's step one. And it was not until I was more advanced, like also grew older, but also more advanced as a writer, that I realized, oh, it's not just enough to put my own clothes on it. I then have to work out what this is saying. It's got to have its own theme. I have to have my own voice. This work has to have its own voice. So that also became the next evolution. So a part of me, I don't know, maybe the itchiness, the thing that weeps when I'm reading good fan fiction, good in that all the crafts tools, writing tools are on show, but I'm like, it hasn't done that final evolution into you are a writer who could clearly find your own voice, have your own thing to say. you can evolve your Pokemon into its final evolution. But I guess I have to accept that maybe there are Ashes out there that always want their Pikachu to be a Pikachu, maybe, and they
Wow.
don't want to Raichu.
That was a beautiful metaphor.
That was
Yeah.
very deep.
But I did
Or
just want
analogy.
to on something Matan also said about something being given the canon stamp, and why do we weigh fan fiction against this big old invisible stamp we want to give something? And I think it's when I've read now bad fan fiction and a character Kirk or Spock says something, and I'm just like, Kirk or Spock would never say that. It's world breaking for me. At that point, it's bad writing because I'm like, that just would never happen. And I understand there's fan fiction that are alternate universes, AU fan fiction, but when it's trying to mimic and fails to mimic, that really grinds me a little bit. I guess it's a TV writer's skill in that writers who work in television get invited into existing writers' rooms because they can prove they can parrot the voice. I can parrot the tone. I can just slip into these characters and understand what they'll say. So say something like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, just the first one I can think of. So that would, yeah. I did a spec script for Brooklyn Nine-Nine, so it's the ability to prove you apply with a spec script, so you're like, I understand the flow and pacing of this show, having consumed it. I understand how the characters talk to each other, and they're like, great, you will slip seamlessly into the writer's room, and it won't break the world of the show by having this writer in. And there's a gatekeeping's not the word for it, but there are blocks in place to a writer reaches a certain level to be able to slip into that to protect the integrity of the show. While fan fiction, anyone can just have a crack and say, yeah, Spock would say that. And then me as a writer, I'm like, no, they would never say that. What are you doing? You're trying to get away with it. And I think on the over franchising, the over sequeling stuff both of you were talking about, I feel like we are seeing that when the quality of a big franchise dips, is again, those checks aren't really in place. New writers, new voices have been invited in. And as an audience, we no longer believe that's the character. For me, I really felt it with the Loki TV show. I know a lot of people were like raving about the final season of the Loki TV show, but I can't admit to feeling that, because by the end of it, I'm just like, sure, that was a thing that happened, but it's not the Loki I really loved from the early movies. And I've tried to like headcanon being like, well, he's literally not that Loki, is he? He's a variant. So that's why this is just boring Loki that we watched in the TV show. He's literally a different Loki. Exciting Loki's dead.
I really agree with you, and I'm so happy you said that, because I think it felt like, okay, this is Loki, but it doesn't feel like, if you put him next to Loki from the first movie or the second movie, I mean,
just
they're
not the
both Tom
same
Hiddleston.
character.
They're both very handsome, but there's nothing like their behavior. Like it just felt like at the first episode of the season, he's like a caricature of himself, like to remind, oh, this is Loki.
Yeah.
He's kind of a schmuck, but that's it. I felt like it was really, and I liked the Loki TV show. I thought it was good, but it did not feel at all like the same character.
These are some of the pitfalls that I feel are heavily associated with fan fiction. One is this sort of echo chamber that they're that
I want
I
to
like
hear
the
the first
Dragon Ball Z
version now.
reference slid in there though.
But no, it's like you get this echo chamber effect where characters do become characters of themselves over time, and that's because they're passed through the filter of the audience and fed back. It's a feedback loop of what the audience liked about certain moments, but often what audiences like about certain characters, and those moments that like really grabbed us in that moment, the reason they grabbed us wasn't because that it's all the time nonstop this is what they do. It's because there's this setup, there's plot, there's significance, and then this little moment is like, oh my gosh, that was so good. But then the studio or whoever takes it sees it, they're like, oh, well, the audience liked it when we did this, so let's do a little bit more of it. And then over seasons and seasons and seasons, boiling the frog, you get hyperbolic these exaggerated characteristic versions of these characters.
Yeah.
So that's something. The other red flag for me that you see in fan fiction as well in like hyper serialization slash franchisation is heavy reliance on cameos. And like you'll see that a lot where it's not leaning on the plot and the literary tools and actually storytelling to grab people in. It's relying on nostalgia and what people liked about the original piece of work, pulling in like the new Star Wars series, pulling in all the old characters, just pulling in this recognized figure to trigger to the audience like, hey, remember this cool person, remember what they did last time, or remember this cool scene from
Member
last
berries.
time.
Yeah.
Huh?
Sorry, I thought about member berries from South Park. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or the Korra series, bringing in, like I didn't think the plot was that strong in that series, but a lot of the sort of major twists, cliffhanger moments would come from, rather than actually gripping the audience, it would come from bringing in a recognizable face and then ending the episode. And it's not a strong storytelling tool, and that's where a lot of fan fiction falls over a lot of the time, as well as industry work.
Well said.
I don't know.
Can I mention one tiny pitfall that I thought
Yeah,
about?
I was actually just about to ask you.
I was thinking it's tunnel vision, and what I mean by that is I feel like having read it's been like 10 years, but having read a lot of fan fiction, it feels like a lot of the authors had a specific story element in mind that they really wanted to see. For example, they wanted to write Naruto, but he's super intelligent. And that's what they wanted to write, and that's what they sat down to write. So that's what they write. And all of the scenes are about showing that Naruto, who's a doofus, being super intelligent. And I feel like they kind of neglect other elements of the story because that's what they're here to write. And if they're here to write a specific relationship or romantic involvement with characters that are not involved in the original material, then that's all they care about. And that's what you'll see, which if you look at it as a standalone story, it's quite bare in other ways.
Yeah.
And it really like it cannot stand on its own, which I think makes it just like a work that is not whole. Like you couldn't enjoy it by itself if someone just explained to you.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Is it's a sort of meta storytelling where the story of itself doesn't stand on its own. It only makes sense within the context of another work, and it only has any remote sense of satisfaction based on something else that existed. And you do see it pumped up in fan fiction because a lot of time you do get inexperienced writers writing it. So on top of other pitfalls that you see in this sort of space, on top of that, you do have poor craft on top of it where it's not understood, like building significance is not understood. So they take this one element they love from this thing, and suddenly that's just every scene, that's all that they're doing in the fan fiction, as opposed to, all right, well, we need to hook in the reader, we need to set a ground level of understanding, we need to create significance around this event, and then drop in the point I'm trying to make, which is a hyper intelligent Naruto. Then we drop that in for ultimate satisfaction. No, they take this element that they really loved and they just kind of treat it like a piece of candy and they just throw it in there, and it's like it's straight sugar.
I really want to twist the question towards Ali, really, really short, not take too much time. But Ali, since we have listeners that are writers and you've been there, do you recommend writing fan fiction at all? Is there any benefit to it?
Again, I thought it was a very good early first step. It was like an easy, safe way to explore craft tools without even really knowing that's what I was doing. But I feel like I don't want to insult fan fictions out there by being like, it's great for children taking their first steps. Because I know there's adults who do it. And I do want to give a shout out to some working friends of mine who have worked on a short film called Blaster in the Right Hands. And what that is essentially it's a Star Wars fan fiction short film. And it's really good. They've used it as an opportunity to showcase their craft skills, actors, fight choreo, really cool stylistic take on Star Wars, cinematography. and just the tone of it and everything. So they've just created this
Love
little
that.
pocket that's really enjoyable to watch. But at the end of the day, it is fan fiction, but they can use it as a bit of a calling card, business card to be like, we're filmmakers, this is what we can do. We're not monetizing this. We've just made this completely for fun because we love Star Wars and we're adding to the Star Wars culture, fandom, and I absolutely see the value of that. And I really enjoy that. And I feel like Star Wars and My Little Pony both have the same kind of rabid fan bases that are building their own culture in that same way. So I totally get it. On the flip side, I think we've all circled on the same thing where as writers, we know to create a good product, we really need to torture our audience in equal parts, like reward and torture. Like, I think there's a sick part of all three of us are like, it's not good writing if it doesn't hurt you.
Yeah,
While we've all
make me
glanced
work
at
for
fan
it.
Yeah.
We're like, what? This is just happy fun times. This isn't real.
Yeah.
But a part of me, then the fraud goes, but who am I to stop the person who just wants to read 10K of happy fun times? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that. I just know it makes me feel itchy. If I have one final bone to pick, though, that I want to throw that what really bothers me about fan fiction, the fact that, say, 15 years, no, maybe older than that. I feel like the lore of fan fiction started with Spock and Kirk, and then with the rise of computers and the internet saw the equal rise in sharing fan fiction. But I think there was a really big, the era of Harry Potter was quite huge for it. So we are talking 15 years ago, I think. Those people who wrote fan fiction as teens are now adults, and many of them have taken the sidestep into professional working writers. So for the first time, we are seeing, fan fiction writers who were really into it are now writing. And so what are they producing? And I want to draw the line between a publishing trend that I absolutely despise at the moment, that I think could be the doom of publishing if it's not grown out of. And it's when someone so we're talking book talk and we're talking, this is a friends to enemies book, and you're going to get a scene where it's, there's only one bed in the hotel and she's cold and he's got the jacket. And then that's how they sell the book, just on hitting those tropes. And the book could be about anything. And some publishers are like, I don't care. I'm just looking for stop me if I've told this story before, but I was looking through a manuscript wish list for agents. And there was literally one agent who said, I'm looking to publish something that is like Regency, but told from the point of view of the maids, like the servant staff, maybe like a larger cast. And they would gossip about the people they serve, and there's a little romance among the serving staff. So rather than just saying, I'm representing literary fiction, I'm representing romance, that's what she said she's representing. She literally had a laundry list of tropes. So at that point, this agent's just asking someone to write a book to that trope profile so she can publish it, which for me, I'm kind of like, at that point, just write the book yourself. Like, you're just asking someone to write this trope thing so you can publish it on the strength of the tropes on Booktop, so you can sell it to people who only want to read those tropes. Like, it's just this trope pipeline where the finish line of the tropes is now dictating what writers are writing. And for me, that feels really gross, because that's market controlled, controlling the creative, and everything we whinge about franchise movies feeling same-ish, that will do the exact same thing to books. And it dawned for me the other day when someone said this to me, but it's off the fan fiction search era. Like, someone would just type in enemies to lovers into, I can't remember the name of the website. Was it
fanfiction.com?
There's a specific one I am thinking of.
I don't have it bookmarked anymore.
Maybe I won't plug
it's fanfiction.edu. Sorry.
That's
they must have lost the com a few years ago.
They're not allowed the com anymore. I wonder why. But it's the key tags you would search fan fiction for are now how publishers are marketing books, and more sinister than that, in my point of view, how agents are asking for things to be pitched to them. And I'm like, oh, that's a
Yeah.
really weird side effect of the fan fiction era that's now we're only kind of seeing this happening in real time now, mostly around romance genre, for obvious reasons. I feel like we've done a very excellent job of not talking about porn and smut on this episode. Go
We're
us.
circling it.
Yeah.
We're like going, we're like
We all
But
know it's there.
stepping
blah,
over
blah,
it.
it's
blah.
also
Yeah.
seeping into fantasy a little bit, and I'm like, ew, get out of my fantasy.
Yeah.
Let fantasy be fantasy. Don't want to write like, yes, these genres are very tropey, but asking them to be written to tropes, something about that doesn't sit well with me as a creative.
Yeah, it's writing from like SEO inspiration. And like what you said,
Yeah.
it's the
I like that.
market
I like that,
driving.
Felix.
And that's where, whether it's fan
SEO
fiction
writing.
or industry, it's SEO writing. When the market drives the creativity, you get stale cardboard work. End of it.
Ah.
Like, boom.
Yeah.
Like, done. End of discussion. I want to give a shout out to Like Stories of Old, which is a channel on YouTube, which did an excellent like 30-minute video documentary on the Marvelization of Cinema. And basically he talks all about like sequelization and this whole market driving the literature as opposed to creatives driving the literature. Excellent work. I recommend checking it out if you want to dive deeper into what we're talking about here. But yeah, like what you said, it's rather than like, I love what you said about like, rather than saying like, just write me a fantasy book or write me whatever, they're calling out these keywords as opposed to just saying like, we're a fantasy publisher. We publish fantasy. Hey, authors, write fantasy, what that is, and submit us your work. And by leaving it open, it's an open petri dish for new things to grow. Because the reason fan fiction is appealing and the reason these sequels are desired is because they're based on original works that initially grabbed the audience. But the reason that those original works were allowed to exist was because they were allowed to grow out of something new. But if you're not willing to take risks, if you're not willing to go out into unexplored territory, you're never actually going to get that really gripping thing that pulls someone in and makes them think like, wow, like that really took me somewhere. Instead, what you're doing is you're writing for clicks, you're writing for a safe number of butts in seats at the cinema. You're writing because it's safe and it's recognizable. And in that, like in the documentary thing that I watched, he talks a lot about recognizability, and that's a lot about like what I was talking about with cameos and relying on things that audiences recognize just to appeal to their nostalgia, appeal to what their memory of something that they did love, by creating something that looks like what they love to get them to read something or watch something or something like that. And that's basically it. When it's fan fiction, it's someone exploring it because they love it. And I can admire that. When it's on the thing, when I said before how it makes me itchy and I don't like it, but I don't attack fan fiction so much, what I really yell at are these people that actually own the IP that are just doing it to get more money. And it's because there's demand for more of this story. But the problem that you run into with a lot of this stuff is storytelling after the story has ended. And I think you mentioned that before, Matan. It's like the story's over, just let it rest. Like, don't try to revive it, just let it rest. And I for so long I was the things on Netflix that appealed to me the most were like, I would see like 10 episodes and then it's over, like they ended it. Oh my gosh, thank you. Like, I love it when someone can end a story, because I don't know, that's a big green flag
satisfying.
for me.
It's satisfying, right? Like, like you'll take care of me. You'll give me the catharsis I so badly crave. You're not just gonna, tease me with a mid-credit scene promising more.
Yeah.
On that, I think I mentioned it in the Barbenheimer episode, but I feel like we're losing the craft of a good act 3. Like it's been a long time since or it feels more rare that I watch something and I'm like, what an excellent act 3.
Can I put you on the spot, Ali?
Yeah.
Is the good third act a myth?
A
does it
good
really exist?
no.
What is the good third
No.
act?
We're gonna have to do an episode on this now, but I'll go
Yeah.
away. I'll research the films and stories where I'm like, Act 3 nails it, brings it home. Because I feel like so many things I've seen recently, I'm like, Act 1, amazing. Act 2, fine. Act 3, what was this dog's breakfast? Oh my God. Well, I feel like older films, the cinema, had a lot of emphasis on the good Act 3, while Act 3 is such an afterthought these days. So that let's write that down for a future episode.
I like that.
I'm gonna say Tarantino's probably got some killer act threes.
Knives Out comes to mind when I think of.
I haven't watched it. I can't find it on Netflix. They have the next one, but not the first one. What the hell?
That's the first one that came to mind, but I actually don't know. I feel like there are better examples out there, but
Yeah,
now I'm just going back through movies and things, trying to think of endings that really got me, that I really loved, that really did something.
I really just wanted to share how I got to the precipice of writing fan fiction. You see what I did there? And
I actually thought you were going to talk about writing precipice fan fiction.
No. I was starting to brainstorm it in my head. I think I was 16 or 17, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna sit down and write some fanfic. And and then I sat down and I started building the world, and I just feel like, man, no, I want to do my stuff. And I got to the junction in the road, and like not long after, I just started writing my own book, which my first book was remarkably, like, I don't want to say bland, but it really did not try to be for a fantasy book. It almost had no elements that are like magic systems, monsters. It was very, very simple, and I think that's me just trying not to imitate anything out there. But
Right, that's interesting.
yeah, and later my next book was a bit different, but still, yeah, got pretty close there for a hot second.
Again, nothing wrong with that. And again, I'm also not on the extreme where I discourage fan fiction. I think it's very cool that it exists, fan art, fan fiction. I do understand why creatives need to be at an arm's length from it for literal legal reasons.
Oh yeah.
Like the owners of the IP can't engage with it, because the moment they engage, it opens up the room for the creators of the fanfic to litigate. They can be like, hey, you stole my idea. So to go nowhere near, even though they're writing in stolen ideas. So it's just messy. So I think the equilibrium of fans and creators just having a silent, well, if we don't look that way, it's fine. You guys can keep cultivating, having a good time, and just won't engage. I think it's a little over the top when you do see the big companies just like whack-a-moling everything they see for no good reason. At that point, it's like these guys are helping create your brand and celebrating in it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But yes, no, also when I see writers out there being like, why won't this author read my fan fiction? I'm like, there's really good reasons why they're not going to read your fan fiction.
I can imagine the amount of fan fiction that was sent to authors.
I think Neil Gaiman's really gracious about it. I think he has to be politely like, I'm sorry, I can't, but you do you. That sounds great. I think that's probably the best line you can draw.
That sounds great. I think that's actually what makes me feel a little bit itchy about fan fiction. It's, well, for myself, it's because I do want to create my own stuff, as both of you have said, and it just doesn't do it for me. Like, it doesn't give me anywhere near any kind of thrill to sit down and say, I'm gonna write in someone else's world. It's an opposite of a thrill for me. Like, it really like sucks the life out of it for me.
Yeah, I imagine fan fiction writers, this is me projecting, but they get a thrill out of writing characters that are incredibly vivid, that they've watched, that they've seen, and now they get to play with. But I think, maybe speaking for both of you, but I know for myself, my own worlds and my own characters are equally vivid for me of any movie or TV show I've seen. I get the equal thrill out of playing with my own stuff, so that's just as satisfying, if not more satisfying. So I just will naturally gravitate towards that. That's why I didn't have a long career as a fanfic writer.
But they say some writers write what they want to read, And I think fanfic is like the end of that scale. That's like
That's
the
the
edge
extreme.
of that. Like I literally write the version of the book that I want to read. It's not even about doing it for others, I think, for many people.
Yeah.
How crazy is that scale though? It is just like it's taking like so on one end you have genre. It's like write what you want to read. Genre, fantasy. It's very open. You can
Okay.
explore that space in so many ways. The hyperbolic, I'm using that word a lot today, end of
And itchy.
opposite
The itchy hyperbolic episode.
the
Sorry.
other end of that is someone who is friends to enemies. It's taking that or even more so, it's like you know that scene in Harry Potter where he summons the snake and he talks to that snake. It's like they want that scene again. They just want that feeling of having watched that scene again. So they just write. It's almost like they get stuck. If you want to take it to extremes, the very extreme that I don't know if that actually exists, but it's like I want someone to tell me that scene again. Like tell me that scene again. Tell me that scene again.
Relive it.
And then just do it again.
A fascinating
over.
thing on
Let
that
it die.
I'll
Let it
raise
die.
is the idea that is writing complete until it has an audience. And I think that's, well, we've all found ourselves in wanting to, we're not in writing for the commercial element. I'm sure if we could make a living off writing, we would all be cheering. We would love that. But I don't think, again, I'm speaking for all of you, but my experience is I'm not in it.
I do that.
If the devil came to me with a deal, I would take it, you know, like my soul for a bestseller. But yeah, that's just me, maybe.
But we're all having a crack at the commercial side of writing, right? Because and I think a part of it is we like the closing of the feedback loop. The stuff we create, we want it to be consumed by other people. So if fan fiction was truly just for the person writing it, they would keep it in the notebook and keep it to themselves, like I did. But there is this still really interesting, then it goes on the internet. It's still shared. It's still this innate writing isn't complete, art isn't complete until it's at least attempted to get out there and find an audience. And so I'm really interested in that part of fan fiction, that it still needs a feedback ecosystem to exist in some way, shape, or form.
It's like the universe observing itself. It needs to
What's it gonna take for like you to read 500 words of your fan fiction?
Of my fan fiction.
Like right now on the podcast.
What's it gonna take? Like,
oh, I don't know if it exists. We're talking about an exercise book written in my handwriting when I was 10. That's probably in the house I grew up in. Might be worth a lot of money one day. This one.
Might be worth something.
It's probably in the house I grew up in is a code for, this is where we hammer cut back to Allie with a lighter and like gasoline in one hand, watching something burn on the ground.
Oh my, I am fascinated now. If we all went away and found the earliest possible writings of ourselves we could find, not like a school project, elementary writing, but if we're like, oh wow, this is just a story I wrote for fun.
I know where the very first fiction I wrote, I know where that exists, and it's
Do you also have loving parents who kept all that?
No, I just kept it. I think like it was
my own catalog.
I'm my own loving parent. But
well, I need that on a t-shirt. No, this is not a dig at my mom and dad. I love you.
No, I do have loving parents, but I am also my own loving parent. But no, I kept it. It was alive in my childhood closet for a while, I think, and then I did take it with me because it was written in a journal that I had that I just started off of, like, rather than writing my life in here, I'm going to write someone else's. But nice. It's terrible, and not even just like take what you think is terrible and just like, you know, I'll give you permission to raise the bar as high as you want. I don't think
I feel like there's an uncanny valley with child writing. There's a point where it's cute, and then it's really awful, you know, when we kind of get a little better, and then hopefully it's good again.
Yeah.
So like if you're 5 years old and you're writing the story of Barney the squirrel, I'm sure it's fine, but you know, it's not bad writing. You're a child, you know, but
Oh,
some
I
point.
know we've derailed slightly, but this might be interesting for people to hear. So, a lot of the competitions I administer through Westwards, I get to read all the entries of the 500 entries that come through, and we
Oh.
have different age categories: the 10 to 12, the 13 to 15, the 16 to 18, and then the adults. And the 10 to 12's always super cute. Whatever. It usually the thing that gets them over the line is if they've just got a really strong voice or a take on anything. Just that's the stories that stand out. 13 to 15, there's a little bit of, you can tell they've now gone to school and they've been given some craft tools, but it can be a little bit like paint by numbers. So it takes a really special work to stand out, but they start to feel a bit sameish in that age group. 16 to 18 I love, because that almost feels like the age where they start taking risks. They have enough craft under their belt, and then they also don't care as much anymore what people think at that 16 to 18. So you get some just really bizarre stuff that I love in that age group. And then fascinating, you tip over into 18 and you get some people who are, you're like, oh, that was slick. They're a writer, they know what they're doing. But you also get some horrendous crap from the adults as well. It's just suddenly it opens up, the spectrum's this large, where it was
Yeah.
all these age groups are fairly defined by the type of work you're going to get, but the quality either plummets at 18 or goes really good. There's like nothing in the middle anymore, but nothing is usually quite as imaginative as that 16 to 18.
I took a children's literature class way, way back before I even started actually doing it. But they were talking about children's drawings and how when you're just like holding up different drawings from different ages and watching the imagination shift when you do see that they've gone to school and they've started to kind of like, here you see more like recognizability of just sort of like, yeah, it's something you see. One other thing I did want to quickly talk about, just as a quick tag on that I think is really cool, as well as kind of a red flag if anyone out there is listening, and or I'll say it this way. If you want to win an argument with your friends about why something is objectively not great, here's another argument you can use. It's reading something or watching something as a sacred text. What I mean by this is if the author makes a mistake or if the writer doesn't do anything that's actually plot interesting or anything great in any regard, but people logically make it make sense in their mind rather than faulting the writer or faulting the work, they'll instead make the work fit within the context of thing, and it's reading it as a sacred text because it can't be wrong. If it's written, it must be right. If it's seen, it must be correct. So like what you did, Ali, or like with the Loki thing, that's reading it as a sacred text. We're like, well, I guess technically it's not the same Loki, so it makes sense from that regard. At the end of the day, it's not an interesting story. It's not well done. It's not what it is. But you're making it work.
Yeah.
So, and you see that a lot with like, that happened a lot with the second movie in the new Star Wars trilogy, was like, it's like because they need to do this and this is why they need to do that and that's why it makes sense. I'm like, oh yeah, you can logic through why that plot makes sense, but at the end of the day they could have created anything in the world that they wanted to, and that's what they chose to create, and that's the thing I don't understand.
I love that point.
I also love reading something as a sacred text as a practice, but it's also something to watch out for. There's actually a podcast called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, which literally does this thing, which is a great podcast. It's really cool, but they it's set out to do this. They're like, let's read Harry Potter. And literally it's like any fault or quirk or anything like that, we're just going to make it part of the world.
Try and make it make sense. So I 100% agree that if your audience is having to sit there and solve it, it's probably a sign it's not good writing. But where the fandom comes in, so we call this headcanon. When the three of us in our household are sitting down, we're watching something. This has hit us in the face. It happens with Star Wars a lot. We've recently just done a full Star Wars run. Star Wars is a hot mess, but we love it anyway. But we can all admit that it's poorly written in places, literally doesn't make sense in places. So we sit there, and it's a creative exercise for the three of us, and we come up with headcanon to justify, oh, well, that makes sense if that works that way, and maybe there is a blunt side to a lightsaber and a sharp side, and like we sit there and we come up with theories and headcanons to make it work, and that's a fun fandom activity. It's creative. So I think simultaneously I can agree with you, Phoenix, that if a fandom needs to do this, bad writing has occurred, but I see the joy of fans now engage with the gaps, and sometimes we come up with a lot of fun, interesting headcanon, and if I felt the need to write it down and put it on the internet, I might get joy out of that as well. If other people go, hey, that's a really cool headcanon.
True.
No, I'm with you. But then again, I do feel like, is there a work that cannot be scrutinized to hell? Like, but yeah, if your work, like, I think Loki again was a good example. I think Ali, you brought it up. That yeah, it can work because it's a variant. If you've made me jump out of the story to have to consider this, to go back to the story and feel good about it, it's kind of a shame, isn't it? It's kind of a shame. But yeah, money's the name of the game. That's what it is right now. No, I'm being honest. Like, no IP is ever going to end until it flops in the cinema, and that's the new truth. To kill a franchise, to end the franchise, is gonna happen in the box office, not in the script, not in the writing room, and that's the truth of it right now. Which, I mean, it is okay. It's giving people jobs, putting breads on tables. But yeah, okay.
What a lovely table.
Yeah. To end things on a bit more positive note, fan fiction's great. I love the imagination of it, and I love that it's people. Sometimes it is just someone loving something so much that they just want to play around with it and explore it in their minds and have fun doing that. And you can have fan fiction is not bad because it's fan fiction. Fan fiction is bad because of a whole slew of objective reasons that professional writers are just as prone to, even if they own the IP. So it's not necessarily just fan fiction, but you do just get a lot of fun. You do get a lot of fun flaming hot garbage in the fan fiction section. It's just how it goes. Anyway, any closing remarks from either of you two before we close it down?
I once again will congratulate us for getting through an entire hour and a bit without saying the obvious that a lot of fan fiction exists, because look, there's romance plots that don't happen fast enough or in creative enough ways for a lot of the audience, so they will just write it themselves, and good on them.
Yeah, they just no, hold my beer. I'll write that scene for you.
And I feel like we would be wrong, or it would be amiss of us to admit that that is a driving force of a lot of fan fiction.
Absolutely.
Without condemning or condoning. Just acknowledging that it is.
Neither here nor there.
And with that, we'll close it down. Some quick little plugs. We are Precipice Fiction. You're listening to our podcast. Welcome to Prose Cons. But anyway, we don't just talk about writing, we write ourselves. We do have an anthology that's out named The New Mythic. It's been nominated for a couple awards, and you can buy that on Amazon. And if you have read it and would like to leave a review on Goodreads or Amazon, that would be absolutely great. You can write your own fan fiction in our comments section if you want. That'd be fine.
We invite you to write fan fiction. We just can't promise we'll read it.
Yeah,
or we'll read it, but we'll not admit that we have read it.
Or if you would like to leave a review that is a fan fiction, that's fine. As long as it's 5 stars, you can do that. Also, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, have liked what we've said or how we've said it, whatever the combination of that is, leave a review for this podcast as well. That helps us out. That helps other people that might also enjoy this find it. We also have an audiobook that is coming very, very soon.
So soon. I can't wait to deliver news.
Wow.
We have not. I know we've been saying that's coming out soon for a little bit, and we have not forgotten about it and have just put it off to the side. We do have things cooking in that space that we are actively engaging on, so there are reasons why it has not come out yet, but it's very, very soon. You're listening to this after Christmas, but we're recording it before Christmas, as well as a slew of other holidays. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever you celebrate, whatever you're doing. during this period. I hope you enjoy whatever it is. And if you celebrate a different holiday in a different time, then enjoy that one too when you get to it. And with that,
Do we have some quotes on fan fiction?
yeah, we have some quotes on fan
Lovely.
fiction. Allie, would
You can
you?
do the short version of Les Grossman, and then you can do yours if you like.
Yeah.
Because I would encourage people to look up the full quote from Les Grossman, but he says, "I adore the way fan fiction writers engage with and critique source texts by manipulating them and breaking their rules. Some of it is a lot of straight up homage, but a lot of it is really aggressive towards the source text."
That was a good summary. I love it.
Yeah, that was good. And then we have another one here by Mary Robinette Kowal, or Robinette Kowal, no say, or I don't know.
You got it right the first time. Mary Robinette Cole.
Mary Robinette Cole. Okay. The difference between fanfic and quote unquote real novel is that fanfic is honest about its inspiration.
I do love that.
Yeah. And it's true. Fanfic cannot hide from where they're inspired. Well, okay. Well,
Not wish to hide.
Yeah. 50 Shades of Grey and all those aside, a lot of people actually don't know. But anyway, digression. Thank you all for listening very much. And last call out right before we close out. There is a comment section in our description notes. If you have any questions or other things you'd like to hear about, other things you'd like to hear us talk about, any commentary on this episode, things we missed, whatever it might be, just want to say hi, click that link in the description section and reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, we will now close it out. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Merry Christmas.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.